So, hi everyone. Yeah, thanks for being here on a Monday morning. I sympathize. Um, so, as Irla mentioned, I'm an artist, writer, and musician um, whose academic background at least, is in medicine. I studied medicine, did my doctorate, and did a year of residency in psychiatry and neuropsychiatry in Montreal, um, before kind of veering into composition and music, and then veering into, um, I guess, a practice that's now kind of a visual arts practice, but that kind of is very research based and adisciplinary, um, and yeah, kind of pays no heed to any kind of boundaries between what might be academic, artistic, scientific, and etc. And the reason I mention this is because I think that this word "forgetting is the sun" is crystallizes a lot of the things that I explore in my practice writ large, which is to say, usually kind of I describe my when people ask me what my work is about, I tell them that my work explores quote unquote anti-colonial pathophysiologies of illness. And this is kind of a phrasing that I use to say, basically to kind of say that I'm interested in the ways our concepts of health and illness are shaped and reshaped by scientific racism and structures of debilitation. And usually, like concretely, what this looks like is that I'll begin with kind of researching a medical concept or diagnosis or tool, and then kind of deconstruct it along artistic, scientific, literary registers. And this is with the hope of reintroducing these concepts, um, that have often been kind of absolved of their colonial histories and genealogies with both poetic and political valence. Um, so this film, Forgetting is the Sun, kind of began. I'm not sure where it began anymore. It's been a while that it was kind of fermenting in my mind, but I think what if I were to sum it up, there's a citation, there's a line by this author, Maria Stepanova, who's a Russian author, a Russian dissident author, who wrote a book called In Memory of Memory, in 2017. And she says, quote, the very dichotomy of memory and history lies in the air we breathe, and it has become fashionable to prefer one over the other. So this dichotomy of memory and history that Maria Stepanova so beautifully kind of, um, the kind of the porousness between the two, and the equivocation of them, that she really kind of funnily addresses here, um, is is the intention of the heart of this work. And so the work is about forgetting, which is a concept that I think isn't given the respect and dignity that it deserves. And this kind of extrapolates also to the lives of people who forget. And here I'm referring to people with dementia. Um, and so I wanted to explore forgetting both in the kind of individual biological register, which is here explored as the patient, if you will, with dementia, the patient who forgets, and the medical memory test that's being administered to them. But I also wanted to think about forgetting at the level of history, um, and how forgetting operates in history, um, in this kind of collective forgetting, that undergirds any kind of collective memory. And so these two registers of forgetting are kind of in dialectical tension throughout the work, um, initially juxtaposed, sequenced, but then as you see kind of throughout the film, they end up bleeding into each other. And it's not so clear anymore which kind of register of forgetting we're, um, we're, we're speaking of, we're addressing. Um, but for clarity's sake, maybe for the sake of discussion, maybe it helps to kind of speak of them separately initially and then merge them together. And so let's start with the individual, with the biological. You see in the film the kind of the only original footage in the film is this long shot of an elderly woman's hands as she's counting her prayer beads. And while she does this, she's being questioned by an acousmatic narrator, um, who is captioned as the memory test administrator, who's asking her these, who's essentially administering the memory test. And this person stays silent, um, you know, so there's numerous injunctions. I want you to repeat after me. I'm going to name you 5 words. Can you please repeat them? And nothing. And so there's this refusal here, a refusal to kind of submit to the the kind of contract that's bound by this memory test. And this memory test is an actual medical test. So when I was a resident in psychiatry, about 5, 6 years ago, or maybe even 7 now, um, I was interested in neuropsychiatry, and I think a lot of people are, in the sense that the profession of psychiatry and now the practice of psychiatry is very heavily um, scientized, if that's a word. It's kind of like psychiatry kind of started as like an organic practice, like a practice that was interested in pathologies of the brain that could explain mental illness, and then kind of throughout the 20th century, you had like this wave of psychoanalysis that took up psychiatry and had more radical forms of psychiatry. But now we're kind of with biopharmaceuticals, we're back in this like very heavily organic realm of psychiatry. And the neuropsychiatry is very popular. And I was working at a memory clinic, um, that was in kind of, that was like this little Victorian house, in this beautiful kind of field right next to an asylum, essentially. I mean, it's called a mental hospital, but it's an asylum for all purposes in Montreal. And day in and day out, I would administer this test, which is called the MOCA, which stands for Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test. Um, and yeah, the fact that it was invented in Montreal, and I'm from Montreal and based there, all this was more of a coincidence than anything, because this test that was invented in 1996, um, is now kind of the gold standard for the diagnosis of dementia worldwide. It's been translated in over 40 languages and is used everywhere. So you have this test that kind of boasts this impossible claim, which is to measure memory. And the consequent the consequences of this test are, I mean, they extend far beyond the clinical. I mean, this test, which is like, it's essentially kind of these various questions, and all the questions that you hear in the film are questions that are taken from the test and that are kind of maybe modified a little poetically. So you really have, these questions of like, I'm going to name you 5 words. I want you to remember them and repeat them back to me. Or I'm going to read you a sentence. I would like you to repeat that sentence. Or this is a section on abstraction. I'm going to read you 2 words and I want you to let me know how these are similar to each other. So you have these questions and they map out kind of the main cognitive spheres. And then at the end, there's a pointage that's accumulated based on the amount of questions the patient gets right. And if the patient scores lower than a certain amount, they're essentially warranted a diagnosis of dementia. And this is considerable because this test can be used as evidence in court um, to then um, strip people of their rights based on the fact that they have dementia or not. And this woman in the film that's counting the beads is my grandmother, and I'm very close to her. I grew up with her. She lives with my mother, and she has issues with her memory. But I was always kind of, I always, as I mean, she kind of grew up poor in Iran. Maybe, grade school education, like to the fifth, fourth grade, single mother, working mother. And, I was, every time I would apply this, I would administer this test. I remember thinking to myself, like this would be hard for anyone. Like even forget like dementia or whatever. Like this would be hard for me, like on a day like today, like on a Monday morning. So imagine for this other person. And then, and this is not even to get into like the kind of the colonial underpinnings of what kind of cognition is and how it can be measured and what is a good measure of it or not. Um, so this test, it just kind of stuck with me for the longest time, and it just felt natural that it would be used as a template for the script of the film, um, which it then becomes. Um, so that's the individual kind of biological register. Oh, yeah. So the hands and the counting. Just one word about that. The so the kind of the prayer beads that the woman is counting in the film. This is very common in kind of the Middle East, if you will. This kind of a lot of elderly people and not so elderly people just kind of constantly always have one in their hands, and it's like it's almost this like automatic kind of gesture. Um, but I wanted to highlight, I wanted to kind of to direct your attention to it in a way that makes you hopefully consider it as more as just an automatism, to think about it as a sort of intelligence in itself. One of the questions in the memory test is a math question. It's a counting question. And and in a way, it's like even if this counting, at least in my grandmother's example, and I think in most example, even if this counting isn't a fully conscious one, there's still kind of an embodied intelligence here, the kind of the intelligence of the hands, especially the workers' hands. And the hands kind of became also a visual motif that kept on recurring um, throughout the two kind of video essays that are juxtaposed. Um, and so maybe this is a good kind of segue to get into the aspect of the video essay, because maybe I should have started off with this. So this film is a video essay. Um, and you know, what is a video essay? You can kind of define it in many different ways, but I when I think about kind of the great video essays, I think about like Yvonne Rainer, Chris Marker, Trinity Minha, Godard, Laura Mulvey, all these kind of theoretically and politically rich films that blended different registers of footage with a kind of a commitment to study um, in a way that manifested throughout the kind of heavy-handed use of text and theoretical references throughout them. Um, and and I think what drew me to the video essay as a form, as a cinematographic form, was its use of text not only as um, not only as like building blocks for a script, but as an actor in itself, as a kind of protagonist of the work. Um, and, you know, as you notice, text is very present in the work, not not only when it's being spoken or read, but also as it appears on the screen, as it unfurls. Um, and there's information that's being kind of delivered, but also constantly metabolized. Um, and so the video essay kind of felt right as a form to address these topics, which were, I mean, very kind of theoretical topics, but that I felt that needed a kind of visual manifestation. Like I couldn't like this work couldn't have been an essay. Like because sometimes I don't know how many people have like a writing practice here or a research practice, but I feel like as a research-based artist who also has a writing practice, a lot of times I have these kind of like conceptual constellations in mind. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how do I express this? And a lot of times it's just like, well, okay, well, this could be an essay. Like there's no need to make like an installation or like a sound work or a video work. And like I'm fully content with writing this as an essay. But in this case, I think there was this surplus that had to do with the image. And so and so the work became a video essay about video essays because the two other films that are addressed in the work are both video essays as well. And they're both video essays made by filmmakers who were, I would say, kind of at their heart poets. Um, so the first film is Farrokhzad's The House is Black. Um, and the second film, the one you see kind of in the later end of the work, is the film by a Moroccan poet, filmmaker, archivist, dissident called Ahmed Bouanani. And it's called Mémoire 14, Memory 14. And the reason I chose these films is because they initially it came instinctually because of a lot of the resonances I felt between them, but also of how they address this theme of forgetting. And so the first film, Farrokhzad's The House is Black, is a documentary that was co-commissioned by the Society for Assistance to Lepers in Iran. And so they wanted to make a documentary, a kind of like a straight up medical documentary about this leper colony, one of two leper colonies at the time in Iran. And they approached Forough. And Forough, for those who don't know her, she's one of the, if not the most important contemporary poets of Iran. Um, we could talk for hours about Forough alone. I mean, she's an extremely brave and intellectually rigorous and inspirational woman who lived a very short life. She died at 32, at the age of 32 in the 70s, I think. But but this was her first film, and this was her only film. Um, and she went in this leper colony, and with a small budget, with kind of the mandate of shooting a medical documentary. And what she ended up making was this gorgeous cinematic depiction of life. And by life, I mean life lived at its fullest, joy, beauty in a leper colony, which at that time was considered hell, like complete hell. Like leprosy was still considered to be a contagious disease. People would not even have stepped foot in the leper colony, but Forough went in there and she lived with the people there. She ate with them, she danced with them, she kissed them, she hugged them, she did all these things before even turning the camera on. And the reason why this film is important is because, and the reason how it delivers a kind of a message about forgetting is that, and this is kind of the first line, I think, of the film, and it's a quote by citation of Maurice Blanchot's, um, the French philosopher and writer, and he says, "The time of illness is without the possibility of forgetting." Okay, right. I mean, for anyone who's been sick, for anyone who is sick, you know that illness and pain make it very difficult to forget illness and pain. So you can, like, if you're hurting, it's like you're in physical pain. It's very hard to forget about that pain, right? I mean, and what did she do? She made a film that afforded these people who didn't even warrant the name of people. They were called lepers. I mean, that's how the disease itself subsumed their whole humanity to the point that their name was the name of their disease. And so, what did she do? She afforded them the possibility to forget. She afforded them humanity, the possibility to forget their leprosy. Okay, so that's Farrokhzad. That's The House is Black. Ahmed Bouanani, Ahmed Bouanani's Mémoire 14, Memory 14, is another film that, for me, addressed the question of forgetting in a very potent and historically twisted way. And so Bouanani was a poet and a filmmaker, and he was working in the Centre Cinématographique Marocain, the CCM, which was kind of the kind of the state level, this like state-funded media, mediatic kind of identity. And because of his dissident politics, he very quickly was demoted from the position of cinematographer to an editor. And he was kind of banished in the archives of the CCM. And what did he do? He spent that time unearthing all this footage of Morocco from from its time as the French protectorate, essentially as a French colony. And he made a film using only that footage with a kind of voiceover of one of his poems entitled Mémoire. So this is kind of the eponymous poem of the film. and it's beautiful, and you could find it online. But initially, the film was 104 minutes long, and every week or so, he would bring this film to his editor in chief, who was a tyrant. Um, and every week, this editor in chief would censor some of it because of the way that it addressed Morocco's colonial past. And this censorship wasn't just like it wasn't just like you can't show this. No, he was literally burning the reel of the film. And so this reel just kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter until only 24 minutes of the film remained. So you went from 104 minutes to 24 minutes. And the only reason that the film wasn't completely destroyed is because this editor in question was killed during a coup during one of the king's birthdays. Like the king was having a birthday. I forget the year exactly. It's mentioned in the film. 100 soldiers kind of raided it. The king didn't. The king was safe and sound, but a lot of his guests weren't, and so he was one of the people who was killed. Um, and so 24 minutes of the film remain, and that's the only version that's available, and that's the version that we can see as audiences. And the reason why this I find the story of this film unbelievable is because you sense this absence. The You sense this absence, but it's as if in this film the absence speaks louder than what you actually end up seeing. And so this what could have been, this kind of this forgetting, the way that this film has been shaped by forgetting, by state sanctioned forgetting, and the way that it still honors it, and the way that it makes this forgetting sing and speak to us, I thought was is absolutely outstanding. And so kind of maybe just to kind of wrap up, because I've been speaking a lot, yeah, Bouanani, Forough, and my grandmother and the medical memory test all kind of ended up in this work being strung together, if you will, like, you know, like the rosary, like the prayer beads. And and yeah, and then they just kind of informed and bled into each other. And in a way, it was really kind of my way of it's a love letter to forgetting. This film's a love letter to forgetting. It's a film that's, as I think Irla mentioned, seeks to restore dignity to the act of forgetting. But it's also kind of, I guess, on a more philosophical level, it it tries to undo this kind of idea of memory and history as being kind of these, factual kind of events, like a string of factual events that are tied together, where forgetting becomes only the negation or the absence of memory. Um, and so hopefully it kind of it invites you to think of this kind of dichotomy of memory and history that um, as Maria Stepanova mentions, lives in the air we breathe. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say.